So, welcome. This is How to Read the Bible Like a Human Being, the culmination of a 3-year full-time research project into using your emotional brain to study the Bible instead of your rational brain. We all sort of learn to study the Bible for theology and application, so what to believe and how to behave. The difference with this study is we're not going to talk about either of those things. So no theological rhapsodies and no personal applications. The focus is we want to get to know Jesus in his world and understand what he's thinking and feeling and identify with him in these stories. So the story we're going to do today is the cleansing of the temple. And what we want to be able to do is visualize the setting in the temple and put ourselves into the moment so that we can feel it, so that we can see it, so we can smell the smell of 5,000 lambs being slaughtered and hear the crowds and that kind of thing. So your emotional brain speaks the language of imagery. So when we create images in our mind, it activates our emotional brain and we get emotional response and we get a different kind of connection to people. And often in our Bible studies, we have these moments where we say, God breathed on the passage, or it came alive in that moment. And what's happening there is the passage is making a connection to something that's real in your life. And so you're identifying with something in the passage. So this way of studying is a way to create that identification every time you study, that you're connecting with what's going on there. So we're going to dive in here. This is a free lesson that's available on the website likeahumanbeing.com. There's also a leader's guide that goes with it. So there's a whole year's worth of curriculum and a book and a website and videos and a texting app, and it's a rich environment. So just to start us off, usually we read the passage out loud, and this is on page 5, I believe, of the file that you have. So I'm going to just do this in the interest of clarity. The Passover of the Jews was near. This is John 2:13-22. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And he found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. And he made a scourge of cords and drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables, and said to those who were selling doves, "Take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place of business." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign do you show us as your authority for doing these things?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "It took 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. So when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he said this, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had spoken. So there's the passage for today. We're going to begin by taking a look at a video of the setting, and this is going to show you what the temple looked like and where in the temple these events took place. So let me just share my screen quick here. All right. John 2:13 says, "The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem." The fact that he went up probably means he took the road from Jericho, a 17-mile climb. It entered Jerusalem from the south after passing around the shoulders of the Mount of Olives. Here Jesus and his men might have stopped to purchase their sacrifice. A Passover lamb fed up to 10 men, so Jesus' party would have needed at least 2 if the 12 were with him. Jesus probably entered the city at its lowest point, the Dung Gate. Then he would have walked up the way of ascent shown here to a plaza known today as the Southern Steps. To understand what happens next, you need to grasp the overall layout of the Temple Mount. Here's a reconstruction viewed from the southeast. Jesus probably entered through the double gate on the south side, following a tunnel which still exists, up onto the huge platform. The temple itself, Herod built it twice as tall as the God-given directions, is shown here, its east face all of gold and white marble. In front of it is the Court of Women, which may not have been completed in Jesus' ministry years, and inside the large doors is the Court of Israelites. The temple courts were surrounded with outbuildings for wood, kindling, oil, lepers, Nazarites, and so forth. The next boundary was the Soreg, a fence about 3 feet high, which marked the closest a Gentile could approach the Hebrew God. Posted at each of the 13 entrances were signs written in Latin and Greek. An actual 2,000-year-old sign is shown here, which read, "No Gentile may enter within the railing around the sanctuary and within the enclosure. Whoever should be caught will render himself liable to the death penalty." Just outside the Soreg is a wall that marks the boundaries of the original 500-cubit square First Temple platform. Here I'm actually walking on part of this original wall, which may date back to the time of Hezekiah or Jehoshaphat. It is exactly 500 royal cubits from the east wall of the Temple Mount. This 500-cubit square represents the sanctified portion of the temple platform. The temple is only what's inside this inner wall, in the 500 cubits. So the Roman guards you see stationed on the roofs of the porticos are not violating the temple because they aren't in it. The space between this inner wall and the Soreg formed the court of the Gentiles, where the cleansing of the temple took place. Since God's house was only the 500-cubit square, Jesus' word about his Father's house becoming a den of thieves only makes sense if the cleansing happened inside this wall. Apparently during this Passover, the money changers and animal vendors weren't content to stay in the public spaces, but took over parts of the court of the Gentiles as well. The large structure on the south end of the Temple Mount was the Royal Stoa, also known as Herod's Basilica. As long as 3 football fields, it was a huge commercial structure. It functioned as a market year-round as well as a center for banking and law courts. Okay, so let's take a few minutes and debrief on the video. What there was different from how you visualized the temple before?
I'd never thought about the precision, the exact 500 cubits by 500 cubits.
Okay. What else?
How big it was.
Yeah, the temple platform was 1/3 of a mile from one end to the other.
And how exclusive it was for Gentiles, and that they'd be having the death penalty if they were to step in there.
What questions? Go ahead.
I didn't realize Herod made it twice as tall as it was supposed to really be.
Yeah,
it just shows his pride.
Yeah, it was grandiose. There's stories in the some things from the period that Herod would sneak in there at night and show dignitaries the Holy of Holies on the sly. But nobody knows for sure if that was true.
I'm struck by how organized and precise the layout is, considering we're going to be soon learning about a scene of disorder.
Right. So what questions did you have about it?
I just wonder, you know, all you who enter, all you Gentiles who enter here, you're in big trouble. I wonder how often that was actually carried out. That could seem not to bode well for community relations.
Right. Well, the Jews, this was the only instance where the Romans allowed the Jews to enforce the death penalty, was entering into the inner courts of the temple. So I don't know how often it happened, but yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
When you said that the sellers did not stay where they were supposed to, was it all the time, or is it just this particular time that Jesus was going there?
Well, we'll get into that. Actually, yeah, let's hold that question. That's a good question. We're going to address that in a bit.
Question I have says when you found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers, where in the temple? What does that specifically refer to?
That would have been, let me find it. I'll show you in the video.
Okay.
So this is the court of the Gentiles.
Right.
This is the royal stoa, which was a market all the time.
Right.
The public space ended at this inner wall. So the market seems to have expanded into this area instead of staying confined to the basilica during Passover.
And maybe even spilled into the court of the Gentiles. That's what you're saying.
Well, this is the court of the Gentiles.
Oh,
In
out there it
here,
is. Oh, okay.
The Keurig is
I
right
thought-
there. Yeah, and this is the area that only Jews could enter in.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So
So-
the basilica part was free for all, for all, I mean?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so let's, there's a couple of sections of background information there. And normally what you'd do if you're teaching this is you'd have people read it before they come. But let's take a minute or two and read the first section of that where it says the Temple Mount. Stop when you get down to selling in the temple. We'll just read that first, about a page worth, and then we'll discuss it. So take a minute and do that.
Excuse me, how far did you want us to go?
Just what's on the screen.
Oh,
That's really doctor.
Okay. So what strikes you in that section, or what was new to you there?
Just the vast openness of it, and I've read some other parts of the book where where like when the woman with the blood went down the very narrow passage. Well, here this is just expansive. in a city that has narrow streets, and you come into this, that they would dedicate this much area to something.
Mm-hmm. What else?
I always wondered how this segregation between men and women played out. And seeing here that there was a court for women and only men were allowed up in the certain area really struck me as to how excluded women were from the actual temple area.
Yeah. Any questions on that part?
The other thing that stood out in that reading was they had the foresight of having an in hallway and an out hallway.
Mhm.
Just the sense of there's always this traffic, well, the logical solution, in and out.
Yeah. Yeah, at Passover, there's probably over 100,000 people that went through the Temple Mount on that day. So crowd control was important. So this next section, selling in the temple, is really interesting. So let's take a couple minutes and read that, and this will get to Sunil's question.
I'll let you read that and I'll read this.
So, what do you think of the idea that this was maybe the first time that Jesus had been coming to the temple every year, at least since he was 13, and this was the first time he'd seen vendors in there? How does that change the story for you?
That would explain a very strong reaction.
Uh-huh.
And just, he came with a certain expectation and it was blown out of the water. This isn't just a little different. This is
Uh-huh.
horrid. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
So let's see if we can
Sights and-
construct.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say everything, the sights, the smells, when you walk in and you expect like a freshly cooked meal to be cooking, and all of a sudden you smell these horrible odors and the noise these livestock are making. It'd be a shock to the system.
Yeah. So let's see if we can construct an analogy for this. There's a special ceremony going on that happens once a year, and you travel long distances to get there. What's something like that in your life? Anybody go to
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving? Okay.
No.
Christmas?
I think of maybe even something more special, which would be a 50th wedding anniversary.
Okay.
You've been anticipating for a very long time, and you've probably formed images in your mind about how it would look and what those special, precious hours would be.
Yeah. Or even a wedding.
Even a wedding.
Traveled for this special holy day. Now imagine you walk into your daughter or your son's wedding, and in the room there's a row of vendors along the back wall, and they're hawking, wedding swag. Here, get your wedding wands. 5 for $10. What do you feel inside of you? Give me some feeling words.
Violated.
Okay?
Insulted.
Insulted, violated, what else?
Angry.
Very sad.
Angry. Somebody said something else there. What was
Disgust.
Very,
Disgust.
disgust?
very sad.
Okay. Now, if it's you and you had a special dispensation to not be a Christian for the next 90 seconds, what would you do? John Taylor, what would you do?
Are you kidding me? I'm getting out. I'm walking out of here.
Uh-huh. Oh, it's your son or your daughter.
What are you doing? What are you thinking?
Uh-huh.
Sorry, what's going through my head right now is my wife's mother passed away recently, and we went to the funeral home for that initial meeting and talking some details. But oh my goodness, the things that they offer, this piece of jewelry with a thumbprint embossed on it, all of these different. I'm like, what? Seriously? We're here for this, discussion about remains and that kind of thing, and you're trying to upsell me, so to speak. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay, good. That's a
Disbelief.
good analogy. Somebody else, somebody who's a D on the disc. What would you do if you saw the vendors at your child's wedding?
Get upset, chase them out.
Good. So yeah, it's the fact that it might have been the first time is a real interesting part of what makes up this story. So let's flip down and read the last page. This one starts, it says the temple tax at the top. And this has some fascinating details as well. So, does this give you some texture to the den of thieves idea? What caught your attention in that section?
I was kind of thinking, wow, our tithe thing is nothing.
Okay.
Well, how they resold the animals. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking that there's a whole lot more extortion and corruption than the story ever tells about.
Mm-hmm.
Just reading scripture.
Yeah. Yeah, the high priests were fabulously wealthy. They drank imported wine and used Roman vessels and dressed in, exotic Roman clothing. And so you could see why the Sadducees supported the Romans, the regime, because they were massively profiting from it. So how would you feel about it if you found out that your pastor was raking 20% off the top of the tithes?
to live in luxury.
Yes, exactly. So how do you think people in those days reacted to all this?
I have to ask myself why they continued to pay. Maybe it's because in our country, we would just refuse, but so many of them just um, cooperated reluctantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If any of you ever watched the Russian dash cam video thing on YouTube, they have these car crashes that show the dash cams. The Russian ones are great because there's always snow or ice or whatever. But what's fascinating is sometimes watch an American dash cam video and then a Russian one and listen to the voices in the car and how they react to the accident. The Americans are angry and offended. You idiot, why did you? The Russians are. It's like they're expecting bad things to happen to them, and this is their lot in life. And so I think for the people at that time, they didn't have an expectation that they were going to change their government, especially since they were a conquered country. So you just went along with it because you had no other options. And this is the kind of thing where it's really hard for us as Americans to read the Bible and comprehend what's going on because the people thought so differently. They just accepted that this was the way things were and went to worship their God.
Yeah.
And they experienced it too from the Roman government. The Romans just kept taking
Right.
taking taxes, and you can't do anything about it because they're Rome and they're in charge. And here, now you're the holy life that's important to you. Well, they're the priests and the Sadducees, and they're in charge. I guess I can't do anything about it.
Right. Yeah, another little tax vignette. Peter had to buy a concession to fish on his own lake. When the Romans came in, they made fishing concessions, and they were so expensive that the fishermen couldn't afford to buy them. So the rich Roman who owned the concession loaned them the money to buy the right to fish in the lake and then took a percentage of their catch. So it's one possibility is that Matthew, the tax collector in Capernaum, was the guy who brokered these deals and made sure the Roman got his cut. So now imagine what happens when this guy, how do Peter and James and John feel about Matthew in that situation? They're not happy with him. And then one day he becomes a disciple. Oh my gosh.
But Jesus, are you sure? Do you know about this guy?
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, we think our taxes are bad here, and they're some of the lowest in the developed world. In Jesus's day, they were way higher. So let's dive in some to the passage itself. And what we want to do here is try to create a visual picture in our minds. So imagine that you're Jesus or you're one of his disciples. You enter the city, you've come around the Mount of Olives, you enter the city down at the bottom at the Dung Gate. What are you seeing, hearing, smelling, experiencing as you come into the city that day? Get a picture in your mind and then tell us about it.
At the early point, before he gets inside and sees what he ultimately reacts to. At the early point, this is another Passover day. Great to be here. I'm going to get to go to my Father's house.
Right? So focus on, again, we're trying to create a picture in our minds and not think about what it means, but think about what actually is right in front of you. So Janice,
Probably. Oh, sorry.
is that how you say your name? Janice or?
Janice.
So you just walked into the city. What do you smell?
Lots of animals, lots of manure, lots of people or odor because they've been walking a long ways. It's dusty. I'm tired.
Mhm. The road from Jericho is 17 miles and it's uphill all the way.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Ellen, what do you see when you come through the gates?
Well, I was still smelling and observing poop piles that I had to dodge. And being
Okay.
flabbergasted, like, why is this like this? Isn't there a special place for the animals? But I have a feeling that they were just all over, being transported all over now, like just a mess everywhere.
Yeah. People brought their animals to the sacrifice if they were close by. So, yes. Mindy, what do you see when you go through the gates?
I would imagine it's chaotic, people talking, yelling, honking, just almost overstimulating all the stuff visually.
Yep. There are shops all along that street that
Mm.
goes from and Jerusalem's economy was sort of tourism based. It was based on the feasts. So this was a big selling time for the merchants. So you're coming up the hill on this nice broad stone street. It's got steps because it's a long rise up to the temple. You reach the platform. There's one last set of steps. And the steps are like there's two steps in a landing and then two steps in a landing. And so you can't just walk up them. You have to think about what you're doing or else you'll trip. And the theory is they did that so that people would walk more reflectively and reverently up to the temple. So you're walking reverently up to this structure, and you grew up in a village where the tallest building was 2 stories, and it was made of field stones held together with mud. So what are you thinking when you see this huge structure in front of you? Wow.
Wow, that thing is big.
Yeah.
How do they make something that big? You're overwhelmed by its size.
What are you thinking, Barbara?
Well, it reminds me of when the disciples and Jesus were walking by the temple, and the disciples were like, "Look at this. Look at these stones." And I think it would be very, very impressive. There might have been a little bit of resentment because it had been built by a Gentile, and people were flocking to it. There might have been just a little bit of, look at this, look at how we're taken advantage of.
Yeah, your tax dollars at work.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's all.
When you look up along this wall, does anybody know what some of the details of the wall or what it looked like?
I think you mentioned there's Roman guards up at the top of the wall. So you're
Trying to take it all in.
It's just reminding you of, okay, you're you're occupied here. These are not Jewish policemen. These are your occupiers keeping you where you need to be.
Yeah. Does anybody remember the first time you ever went to the big city and there were skyscrapers, and what did you think or feel when you saw that for the first time?
I felt
Well, I imagine there might be people. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you feel small.
Mhm. There might be people tripping over one another because, like you say, they're trying to climb these steps and they're looking up at the same time, and I bet there were some falls.
Okay. Gawkers. Right.
Mhm.
There are pilasters at the top of the wall, like columns with huge capitals on them, and it's all decorated in the Greek style, and it's quite imposing. So you go through the tunnel underground, the 16-foot wide passageway. You come out on the Temple Mount platform, and you walk through that inner wall. So now you're in the court of the Gentiles. So what do you see, smell, hear around you there?
So everyone had to pass through the court of the Gentiles, even if you were Jewish.
Yes, it was
Huh?
concentric.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Well, I being Jewish, which I'm not, but if I was his disciples being Jewish, I would want to make sure that I didn't touch any of those unclean Gentiles, especially the women.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Why would you particularly not want to touch them there?
Because I'm on the way to be close to God, and I mean those are dogs, right?
Right.
Got to stay clean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You couldn't come into the temple unless you were ritually pure. So at the bottom of that big long street is the Pool of Siloam, which they've just excavated in the last few years. And they believe now that that was a mikvah, a ritual bath, so that when you came into the city, you took a bath at this big 200-foot long pool and put a fresh set of clothes on, and then you went into the temple. And the Pool of Bethesda was the same thing at the northern end. It was a mikvah as well. So, like when Jesus heals the guy at the Pool of Bethesda, he's probably there to take a ritual bath before he goes into the temple. So, interesting little detail. So, yes, they've all got clean, they put on fresh clothes, they come into the court of the Gentiles. What else do you see there?
Can I ask a question? Is it just the men at this point? No women, no children?
No, it's all of them.
It's all of them.
You've got,
So women and children can go in the court of the Gentiles.
yeah, outside of the temple, court of the Gentiles, the Jewish area inside the Soreg, court of women, court of men, court of the priests. So it just goes in. So what do you, here's another little factoid. They went barefoot in the temple because, this is holy ground like with Moses. So what concerns would you have if you're walking around the temple that morning barefoot?
Well, now that you come in expecting that there's no animals going to be here. There's animals all over the place, and the first thing I'm going to be doing is watching my feet to where I step.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to become dirty. I mean, it's like if I came out of the shower and all of a sudden there's mud all over the floor because my house has been flooded. Ah.
Yeah. How many animals went through the temple on Passover?
Well, thousands. I mean, it was if 1,000 people. Did we say 1,000 come? 100,000 comes 100,000.
Uh-huh.
So that's the number of animals that would have been there. So that's a lot of animals making their way through there.
Right. What's it sound like in there? What sound do lambs make? Okay, they bleat and they cry. So you've got that going on. What other animals are there?
Doves.
Okay.
Doves. I couldn't tell what somebody said. Doves?
Yep. There are lots of doves there.
Oxen.
Do we have
Oxen.
bulls? Oxen.
Uh-huh. Have any of you ever been to a cattle auction?
No.
What are the sounds and smells of a cattle auction, Todd?
It's almost like a screaming noise. And well, there's people, there's animals. I grew up in Minnesota and Iowa, so we go to the state fair, and you go like to the sheep barns. The smell was so bad it actually burns your eyes.
Hmm.
It's that bad.
And you said there was a screaming noise. What's that?
Well, it just with the sheep they make with all the people and the interaction and if they're gonna start killing them, there's that screeching, crying noise.
That was my
But
question.
it's high shrill. Yeah.
The section says it's the Passover was near. So are they actually just purchasing their animals for Passover day, or are they actually already sacrificing animals?
Good question. It's what would you, based on verse 13 there?
Well, I mean, yeah, all the oxen, the sheep, everything's in there. I just am thinking to myself, it's got to be an assault on your senses. But
Yeah.
if they are actually doing the sacrificing at the same time, that's a whole nother layer of smell. And like Todd was saying, if animals are, as they're being slaughtered and everything that's going on, I mean, that's just a whole nother layer.
Sure. What do you think the near refers to in verse 13?
Soon.
What's Jesus doing when the Passover is near? Is he at the temple? Is he going up to Jerusalem? What do you think that?
That's true. He's on his way up, yeah, as it's near. So maybe this is Passover day when he is in the temple.
Yeah, I'm assuming you wouldn't be buying your lamb to sacrifice the day before. So you have to take care of it.
Unless you're going to take home a lamb chop first and then sacrifice the rest.
Well, you would sacrifice it on Passover day, so you'd have to take the live animal home. So yeah, I'm assuming this is Passover day.
I had read somewhere along the line, but it could be fact or not fact, but fiction. But the idea that they would get the lamb for the family before Passover, and it would have to actually live with the family, so that it actually was a sacrifice because they had an affection for this little sheepy. So I was just thinking, well, I wonder how that works into this story. So I don't know if it's true or what it, but the idea of a sacrifice that you're a little bit more related to is kind of interesting.
I don't know. I do know in the story of David and Bathsheba, her name is Bathsheba in Hebrew, and a bat was a pet lamb. So when what's the prophet's name there?
Nathan.
Yeah, when he tells the story about the family with the pet lamb, the pet lamb is Bat and Bathsheba.
Wow.
So anyway.
Interesting. Didn't know that.
So you're walking across this nice inlaid marble floor, acres of marble, thousands of animals have been through there. There's little piles, probably guys going around sweeping up. What's happening in the temple on Passover day? I mean, in the priestly area.
Sacrifices.
Okay, what's that involve?
A lot of blood, a lot of horrible smells. If you've ever been in a slaughterhouse, I mean, I've been in a slaughterhouse, and you just actually having been in a wet market in Singapore, and the smells of freshly slaughtered animals. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, so Gordon, now imagine yourself just closing your eyes and worshiping in that slaughterhouse.
It'd be a bit distracting. I wonder if somewhat you haven't grown to expect that, as that's part of what Passover consists of, is that smell. And maybe you've actually come to accept it. That smell is acceptable, but not some of the others.
Right, right. Now think of yourself, you're a Gentile God-fearer who's at some level practicing the Jewish religion. You took a ship down here from Ephesus and then walked all the way from the coast. So this has been a 2-week journey to come to the temple and worship God for the first time. You come into the worship space that's designated for you, and they've made it into a market. How does that impact you?
Well, you might not have known that that wasn't how it was supposed to be. If it's your first time, you didn't know what to
Okay.
expect.
Okay.
Nobody ever told me about this.
Uh-huh.
I would have found it very distracting and disappointing because this is supposed to be a special time for me. And
Uh-huh. Yeah, I'm spending a month away from home for this.
yeah,
I think I would question my beliefs and faith. Like, this is what I bought into.
Mm-hmm. This isn't any different than the temple with the prostitutes at home. Yeah.
I was taken back to when we first moved to China in '93. They had something called a foreign exchange currency. So if you're a foreigner, you got a different exchange rate than local people.
Mm-hmm.
And so you basically got extorted just because you were a foreigner.
And when you figured that out, what did you think and feel?
I didn't feel welcome. I felt like
Yeah. So take a minute now, and we have smells, we have sounds, the smell of manure, the sound of vendors. What does it sound like when you've got Middle Eastern vendors? What do you hear?
Arguments.
Uh-huh. How do you buy and sell in the Middle East?
Barter.
You barter. So you hear haggling and people, no, it's too much, and all this is going on, and you're trying to worship. Well, think about Jesus. Jesus comes in and sees this in the place of worship, and he sees the confusion on people's faces, and the disappointment, and the hurt, and the anger. Um, Take a minute and just try to put yourself into Jesus' mind frame. And then it says, Jesus made a whip out of cords. So what's the mind frame you put yourself into? What place is Jesus in at that moment?
Ticked off.
I feel like he's saying there's absolutely nothing here that glorifies my Father.
Uh-huh.
Nothing.
And
And
how
it
does that
it
feel?
should be all about him, and it's not.
Uh-huh. Right. And this just isn't somebody else's father, it's yours.
Yeah.
So then Jesus takes these cords. One possibility is there was a cord tied to each animal's horn that they would tie it to the slaughter stake with. So it's possible that Jesus picked up some of those cords and he wove a whip of cords. So I'm going to take a minute and just weave a little bit. And if you've got some string handy, you can do this, or you can just imagine yourself doing it with me. But Jesus sits there and starts weaving a whip of cords. and just keep yourself in that emotional place where Jesus was and think about how this would affect you to sit there and weave.
Focus.
Yeah. So how does it affect you emotionally to sit there and deliberately, patiently I mean, it takes a while. How does it affect you?
You know, it's as you're doing that, I'm trying to I'm thinking, here he is. All those sensory things we've just discussed are continuing. And he's kind of clearing his mind that, okay, I'm clear in my mind now what I need to do. It's almost like he's coming to peace with what he's about to do. He's just, to me, that's what I'm feeling. It's like, okay, I've got to do this. This is the right thing to do.
How about some of the rest of you? What would you be feeling and thinking as you're doing this?
You know, as I'm watching you, sorry, as I'm watching you doing that, it reminds me of like knitting and crocheting, and you get into a real meditative state. And it takes a while. It's not like he just took one string and grabbed it and reacted, but it becomes very meditative, and I can see like a bit of centering. Now you're centered. You're in the middle of chaos, but you're centered now, and here you are. And I can see him maybe dialoguing with God as he's doing this. And there's things going through his head, and it's very deliberate, and he's very determined in this because he's going to finish the whip that he started weaving. So it's going to take a process. And at the end of it, he knows why he's making it and what he's going to do with it.
Mm-hmm. Somebody else?
Yeah, similar thoughts. It would be a centering, calming exercise. Calm down the emotions will also help. Reflect, talk to his father, listen to his father. What do you want to say? How do you want me to respond to this? I don't know if he knew what he wanted to do with the words when he started necessarily. Might be a process. So just exercise the process with the father, what he's experiencing.
Okay. So I've got about, 16 inches there. Takes a while to weave a decent whip. So why do you think Jesus did that? I mean, you could just go in and slap a cow on the belly and it would run.
Maybe just like what everyone's been saying, to calm himself down, because it's kind of reminds me of like when you're angry with somebody, just out of the moment, there's a lot of anger, but you know that you need to kind of settle yourself before you act.
Mm-hmm. But Jesus didn't need to ever calm himself down because that never happened to him, right?
What?
Did
He's pretty
Jesus?
human, I think.
Uh-huh.
I said, I think he's pretty human. I imagine he did get pretty ticked off, had that capacity to be mad.
When you're too angry and you don't want to respond out of how you feel, what do?
Deep breathing.
Okay.
Well, what I was thinking about is that when he was doing the, making a score, that he's thinking, because of where I'm at, it just in my theological switch, I would have thought before he was like hitting the people and the animals. That's how I thought. I thought he was just like ticked off, like this wrath. But I don't think that now. I think that he was taking the time and he's like, Papa, what do we do here? This is a mess and it stinks and it's not supposed to be like this and it's making me mad. I'm really uncomfortable, but doing that. And I just sense that Papa was saying that is for animals. You use it on the animals. And I love the people. And so if you get the animals out, the people will go that are attached to the animals into that selling. And so that was just my thought, was helping him to remember in his humanity that he's not going to be whipping people, but animals.
I used to, when I was angry, I'd go out in the railroad tracks and throw rocks. Somebody else have a unique, what do you do when you get angry to blow off steam?
Walk around the block.
Walk around the block.
It's a more quiet process,
Okay.
more internal process.
Yeah. So it's an interesting insight in Jesus' humanity that he stopped and did this deliberate, repetitive physical action that tends to put us into a, I forget what somebody called it, meditative state or something like that. It calms you down. So I mean, there's the use of the whip, but there's also the possibility that Jesus did this to calm himself down so that he's acting deliberately and not out of rage. How does that change your picture of Jesus? How does that impact how you see him?
To me, it's interesting that he's doing that, and he didn't get calmed down like, okay, I'm going to take a few deep breaths and we're just going to let this go, and I'm going to go home and pray about this, and feel like, you know, he couldn't do anything. I mean, he did something.
I
How
think
about
of
you?
the character quality of being slow to anger,
That's good.
that he's operating from this place of grace, but when he does judge, he got there in a thoughtful way.
And how does this impact your picture of Jesus?
I was kind of giggling to myself because, there's a lot of modern day practices that you have when people talk about your emotions and you're going to get angry, or, parenting practices, what to do, what not to do. And, he, in the ancient days, he knew how to handle it. He stopped and deliberately made that time to weave and ground himself, and he was going to be deliberate. So whether it's to calm down or not, I see that he already had the keys. He knew what the key was.
Good. So let's follow him through his. He drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. He poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who were selling doves, he said, "Take these things away. Stop making my father's house a house of business." So first off, you've got lambs, oxen, doves. You're a vendor. So what's your setup there in the temple courts? What do you have with you? Like, some of them had tables. The money changers had tables to, make their change on. If you were selling sheep, what did you have?
A pen full of sheep.
Okay.
Pen.
Money box for change.
All right. You got something for a purse or a money box. Are you going to set up a whole pen? How many animals would a vendor have? Just wild guess. Probably not 3, probably not 300.
20 maybe.
Okay. So if you got 20 animals you want to keep around, what are your options?
I think you might need someone from your family to help out, corral them while you're dealing with the buyer.
Okay, that's good. So maybe your sons are there, each of them's holding 6 or 7. They have a cord on their horns. Would you put up a fence? A pen?
It could be awkward because I'm thinking, I'm picturing that maybe they, like if he had, I'm thinking if I had a helper, a son, and you might tie them together somehow so that you could keep them. Probably the easiest way to keep them in check is to have them tethered together so that you could lead them.
Okay.
And then when somebody says, okay, I want that one there, assuming you do your negotiation and
hold of, 6 or 7 sheep. And Jesus wades in there with his whip of cords and swats a couple of them. Have any of you been around animals that are being driven? What happens?
chaos.
Todd, what have you seen?
Yeah, they panic and they go in different directions and yeah.
Okay. When one of them runs, what do the others do?
They go with them.
Uh-huh. Okay. So you probably have hundreds of animals in this enclosed space. When one vendor's sheep start running, they bleat out the danger signal.
Yeah.
Where do they go?
Any open space.
Okay. How would they get to an open? They're in an enclosure. There's a wall all around them. How would they get to an open space?
They would have to break through their enclosure somehow. Maybe they did. Maybe they rampaged.
Well, what do you see here? Let me show so they're sort of stampeding. They're in this area. This is all packed with people. How do they get out of this?
Did they go into the holy area?
They could. That wouldn't be pleasant. But there's a big wall here all around it.
Says he drove them out of the temple.
Uh-huh. So which way is he, if they're here, where is he driving them?
Towards that gate to the left that you said, maybe.
Right.
Where they came in.
Right, and then lo and behold, down at the end of this basilica is a gate that's 37 feet wide and like 70 feet high or something like that. So a big gout of light is pouring through this entryway. And let me see if I can find a picture of what's outside there. I don't know if I know. I think there's one in the materials. Maybe, maybe not. It's in the part you read. Look on page 4. So there was a giant staircase called the Great Stair at one corner of the temple. Here's this huge 37-foot wide doorway. The stairs is 50 feet or so wide. So all those sheep and cattle come out through this door because it's the way of escape. So now take a minute and try to imagine you're walking up the stairs, you've just taken your bath, you're in clean clothes, you're going to church, reverently walking up the stairs. What comes down at you?
Stampeding animals.
Uh-huh. So how many stampeding animals?
Dozens.
Hundreds.
Frantic stampeding animals.
A trickle, then more and more. What do?
Get out of the way.
Uh-huh. How do you get out of the way?
Press myself against the wall.
Okay. You can press yourself against the sides. The stairway is 75 feet high at the top. So you press yourself against the sides, you look over the rail, and it's 40 feet to the ground. What are you feeling or thinking in that moment?
I'm going to die.
This is the best Christmas ever. What are Jesus' disciples thinking of all this? They came for Passover too. They came for this special ceremony.
They never know what to make of what Jesus does.
Different ones of them probably thought differently. What's Peter think? The brash, action-oriented, say whatever you think guy.
He probably wants to get a cord and make his own whip and get on the action.
Go for it, Jesus. What's Nathaniel think? The guy who does everything right. What would you think if it was you? This is at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. You haven't been with him very long.
I'd be like, yes, it's starting the revolt against taking
Okay.
over and taking back what's ours.
Okay, good. So there's one possible reaction. How else might you react?
As an Enneagram 9, I would say, Jesus, what are you doing? Don't do this. They're going to be so mad at you. Back off.
Okay. What else?
Trouble for this.
Is he really the Messiah that I'm supposed to follow?
Uh-huh.
Well, I'm thinking like I just got the mafia upset.
Uh-huh. Oh, crap.
Yep.
Uh-huh. Some of them might be thinking, Jesus, you're ruining Christmas. I came here for this special day and you've ruined it. So, let's see. What else do I want to ask?
I also was going to say that another point of view is you can get traumatized by how Jesus is reacting, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was just thinking about childhood trauma. Well, early in his ministry, he's done this extreme emotion and behavior that we hadn't seen yet. And oh my goodness, what's happening, right? So like, besides the fact that you can have a lot of injustice and understand what he's doing, and the temple courts don't look like they should, but his reaction is very severe, is very extreme.
Yeah. So let's say that 500 animals come clattering down that stairway. Where do they all end up?
At the dung gate.
Okay. Maybe they run all the way down there. Where else might they end up?
Well, they're at the top of that,
Streets.
they're at the bottom of that entrance of that long corridor. Now they come out into this wide open space, and there's all these people coming up, and they're looking for daylight. Anywhere they can go, they're gonna head wherever they can. Wherever there's an opening, that's where they're gonna head.
Okay. Maybe some of them go down the street. Some of them end up in the plaza. Do the vendors get their animals back?
How do you know which one is yours?
Right. Yeah. There's some poor people that got a really good meal that night for free. There are some rich people who lost a lot of money. So we'll stop here. We're about to wrap up.